She was 24 and standing in the gravel lane with no house key, no bank book, and no one left willing to say her name kindly. No room, no car, just her father's old folding knife and $16 she had earned cleaning stalls at Haverly Feed in Luray, Virginia, and with that $16 she signed the county transfer for a collapsed tobacco barn on Piney Mountain Road in Page County, in a stretch that had not cured a leaf or stored a wagon load of hay since 1989. The roof sagged like a tired shoulder. The floorboards had gone soft under 30 winters of rain. But what nobody knew was that hidden beneath the rotted threshing floor was something that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if you love stories like these, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. We love to see how far these stories travel. Her name was Clara Whitlow, and she had grown up with the smell of cedar shavings, wet clay, engine oil, cured tobacco, and winter hay caught in the seams of every coat her father owned. In the Shenandoah Valley, a barn was never just a barn. It was a place where rain had a different sound. It was a place where a man could speak very little and still leave half his life in the rafters. It held mule collars and feed sacks, broken handles, bent nails kept for later, seed tags faded by mice, and names cut into posts by boys who had once believed they would never grow old. Clara's father, Abel Whitlow, had been one of those boys. He was not a gentle man in the way people mean when they use that word quickly. He did not kiss the top of heads in public. He did not praise a thing before he had tested it. But he noticed. He noticed if a hinge pulled wrong. He noticed if a child held a hammer too close to the head. He noticed if Clara stood near him instead of near her brothers when work needed doing. The Whitlow farm sat 3 miles outside Luray, just beyond a low bend of Hawksbill Creek, where the road narrowed and the mountains gathered blue in the evening. The house had white siding, a tin roof, and a porch that smelled of pepper plants in July. Behind it stood 3 buildings her brothers talked about when they talked about value. The machine shed had the tractor. The corn crib had good oak beams. The smokehouse still had a stone foundation. Nobody talked about the barn on Piney Mountain Road. It leaned beyond the last fence line, half hidden by locust saplings and wild grape. The family did not keep animals there. They did not store tools there. When Clara was little, she asked once why the old barn still belonged to them when nobody used it. Her father had been tightening a chain on the hay wagon. He did not look up. "Some places keep better quiet than people do," he said. That was all. The barn had been built by Clara's great-grandfather, Silas Whitlow, in 1912, when the valley still counted seasons by what a man could carry in his arms. Silas came back from working the rail line near Front Royal with 2 scarred hands, $4 in a sock, and a way of seeing timber that made other men trust his eye. He could stand in front of a tree and tell which side had faced the worst wind. He could set a post so straight a mason would stop to look at it. He built the barn with chestnut beams before the blight took most of the old trees, pegged the joints with locust, and raised the frame with neighbors who came at sunrise carrying hammers, biscuits, and 1 good bottle passed quietly in a flour sack. Silas did not build for beauty first, he built for keeping. The lower bay was for wagons and harness. The center floor was for threshing wheat and later for stripping tobacco. The south wall had narrow slats that let air pass through in measured breaths. The north side faced the mountain and held cold like a cellar. Under the main floor, where nobody but Silas had reason to go, he dug a shallow undercroft and lined it with stone pulled from the creek. He told his wife it was for potatoes. It was not only for potatoes. By the time Clara was born, Silas had been gone 51 years, and the barn had already become a thing people drove past without seeing. The valley had changed. Dairy farms sold to developers. Sons took factory jobs. Daughters learned computers and left before the first frost. Barns lost their purpose and then their roofs, and after that they became scenery for other people's photographs. Abel Whitlow did not sell the barn. He let the house wear new siding before he touched that road. He repaired the tractor twice before he bought a better truck. He argued with tax assessors, signed the papers, paid the small bill every year, and never once said why. Clara learned work from him the way some children learn hymns. By hearing it so often, it entered the bones before the mind knew the words. By 8, she could sweep a feed room so clean the dust settled in corners instead of hanging in the air. By 12, she could drive a fence staple without splitting the post. By 15, she could judge whether stacked hay was heating too much by sliding one thin arm between the bales. By 18, she could sharpen a draw knife, set a brace, patch roof tin, and back a wagon through a gate while both her brothers stood aside and pretended they had not watched. Her older brothers, Russell and Dean, were not wicked men. That would have made the story easier and less true. They were ordinary in the way that hurts worse. They believed value was whatever could be sold quickly. They believed work counted only when someone else paid for it. They loved their father when loving him cost them nothing, and they counted his land while he was still breathing. Russell wore clean boots to dirty places. Dean laughed too loudly when he felt small. They called Clara stubborn because she stayed, and simple because she knew how to fix things they had to hire out. When their mother died of a February stroke, the house changed its sound. Cabinets closed softer. The kitchen clock grew louder. Abel began leaving his coffee untouched until it went cold. Clara stayed. For 6 years she cooked what he would eat, drove him to appointments in Harrisonburg, mended his work shirts, handled feed deliveries, and learned the quiet map of his failing body. She learned when a cough meant weather and when it meant fear. She learned that pride is sometimes just pain with its coat buttoned high. In those years, her father gave her 3 teachings, though he never called them that. The first came in the machine shed after a hinge split away from the corn crib door. Clara wanted to replace the whole frame. Abel handed her a coffee can of saved screws and said, "Look for the soundpiece first. Rod is loud. Soundwood keeps quiet." He made her test every board with the back of the knife. The bad pieces gave themselves away. The good ones stayed under her hand, plain and patient. The second came at the old barn one October afternoon when she was 16. It was the only time he took her there to work. A storm had pulled loose a strip of tin, and rain was finding the center bay. Abel would not let her climb until she had walked the whole floor with him. "Never trust the place that wants your weight," he said. "Trust the place that earned it." He showed her how to step where beams crossed, how to read a sag and shadow, how to listen before committing her body to a board. The third came at the kitchen table the winter he first forgot her birthday. He had a pencil, a seed catalog, and a ledger older than Clara. When she asked why he kept writing after the farm had grown too small to matter, he tapped the page. "Write down what is true," he said. "Money gets spent. Memory gets proud. Paper does not care who wins the argument." Then he wrote the date, the weather, the cost of nails, and the name of the man who had helped him haul them. Those 3 teachings stayed with Clara longer than praise would have. Look for the sound piece first. Never trust the place that wants your weight. Write down what is true. Abel died on a rainy Tuesday in late March, while the redbuds were just beginning to haze the creek banks. Clara found him before dawn in the chair by the kitchen stove, one hand resting on the folded newspaper, his boots still on, his face turned toward the window as if he had been listening for something beyond the glass. She did not cry then. She put one hand on his shoulder. She turned off the stove. She set his coffee cup in the sink and stood there until the light came gray over the yard. By noon, Russell had called a lawyer. By evening, Dean had driven in from Roanoke with a notebook, a calculator, and a wife who kept saying how hard this must be for everyone. The will was thin. Abel had left the house and main farm to all 3 children, but debts sat against the property like stones in a sack. Medical bills, equipment loans, a line of credit nobody had spoken about because silence is cheaper until the bill comes due. Russell said the cleanest thing was to sell. Dean said Clara could not expect to keep living there for sentiment. Clara said very little. She washed the dishes after the funeral meal. She folded the rented tablecloths. She carried casseroles back to women whose names she remembered because her father had written them in old ledgers beside borrowed tools and returned favors. The sale moved fast. The house went first, then the tractor, then the truck, then the machine shed contents laid out in rows for strangers to touch. Men haggled over her father's socket sets. A boy bought Abel's coat for $5 and laughed because it smelled like tobacco and rain. Clara watched the estate account shrink under fees and debts. When the checks finally came, Russell and Dean found reasons why their shares should be larger. Russell had arranged the realtor. Dean had advanced funeral money. Clara had lived in the house, they reminded her, and that counted for something against her. The lawyer did not call it stealing. He called it settlement. At the end, Clara had $16 in cash, her father's folding knife, 2 changes of clothes in a paper grocery sack, and nowhere to sleep after Friday. There was 1 loose parcel left on the county list. It was not part of the house sale because no buyer wanted the liability. 1.7 acres on Piney Mountain Road, with a collapsed agricultural structure of no declared use. Russell snorted when the clerk mentioned it. Dean said, "Let her have the death trap. She always liked junk." The lawyer said there would be a filing fee. Clara opened her fist and counted the bills once. A 10, a 5, and 1 worn single. If this story is keeping you company tonight, subscribing helps these stories find the next listener. And tell us in the comments, was there ever an old place in your family that everyone ignored, except one person who seemed to know it still mattered? The Page County clerk that afternoon was Mrs. Nadine Rucker, who had worked behind the counter long enough to remember signatures by the slant of their grief. She looked at the parcel number, then at Clara, and then at the name Whitlow on the transfer form. Something in her face went still. "Your father kept this paid," she said. "Every year. Even when he was late on other things." She went to a back drawer and returned with a brown envelope, soft at the corners. Inside was an iron key blackened by age and tied with twine. He left this here in 1997 with instructions that it stay with the parcel. Clara paid the $16. Mrs. Rucker slid the receipt across the counter and laid the key on top of it. "Some places wait longer than people think," she said. Clara walked to Piney Mountain Road because she had no car and because asking either brother for a ride would have cost more than the walk. April had come in damp and tender. The ditches held water. Wild onions pushed through the bank grass. Clouds dragged their shadows over the shoulders of the Blue Ridge, and every farm she passed looked, for one painful second, like a life somebody else had been allowed to keep. The grocery sack cut into her fingers. Her father's knife sat in her coat pocket with the steady weight of a hand. The key swung from a loop of twine around her wrist. By the time she reached the old lane, mud had climbed the hems of her jeans, and the sky had opened into a pale blue slit above the ridge. The barn stood where it had always stood, though standing was too generous a word. The east wall bowed out. The south corner had settled into blackberry canes. Half the roof tin had peeled back, and daylight entered in long, bright wounds. A sycamore had grown at the edge of the ramp, its roots lifting stones Silas Whitlow had set by hand. The doors hung crooked on strap hinges, but the lock was still there, tucked under a lip of weathered oak, red with rust and stubborn as an old man. Clara stood before it and did not know whether to laugh. Her brothers had taken everything that looked like value. They had taken polished things, titled things, things with blue book prices and receipts. They had left her a building the county described as hazardous, a roof the wind could finish, and a key to a door that might not even open. She put the key in the lock. It did not turn. She breathed once, then twice, then took her father's folding knife and cleaned rust from the mouth of the lock the way he had taught her. Not hurried, not angry, only exact. She worked the key again, felt the wards catch, lifted the door with her shoulder to take weight off the hinge, and heard the old mechanism give with a sound like a held breath breaking. The door opened inward. Dust rose. Not the powdery dust of abandoned rooms, but the dry brown smell of old hay, mouse nests, oak, and rain that had come in and left again. Sunlight crossed the center floor in broken bars. The planks were gray, cupped, and dangerous. Clara heard her father's voice as clearly as if he stood behind her. Never trust the place that wants your weight. So she waited. She let her eyes adjust. She studied the floor. The center boards had rotted near the roof leak, but two dark lines marked where the chestnut beams ran beneath. She stepped on the first beam, then the next. The barn complained. A pigeon burst from the rafters and beat itself toward the hole in the roof. Clara ducked and laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because fear sometimes leaves the body wearing that sound. She crossed to the far wall where a row of tobacco laths still hung, brittle and black with age. Below them, a wide plank sat at a wrong angle. It was not obvious. Russell would never have seen it. Dean would have called the whole floor rotten and gone back to the truck. But Clara had spent years learning the difference between decay and intention. Rot is loud. Sound wood keeps quiet. This plank kept too quiet. She knelt, setting her weight over a beam, and tested the edge with the knife. The blade slipped into a seam no wider than a fingernail. There was no nailhead, no screw. Only two wooden pegs darkened to match the floor. She tapped them loose with the knife handle, lifted the plank, and found beneath it a square iron ring folded flat into the shadow. For a long moment, she did nothing. Then she hooked two fingers through the ring and pulled. A trapdoor lifted from the threshing floor, heavy but balanced by some hidden counterweight Silas had made with rope and stone. Cool air breathed up from below. It smelled of earth, cedar, mineral damp, and something faintly sweet, like apples long stored in a cellar. Clara lowered herself down a narrow ladder into the undercroft her great-grandfather had dug more than a century before. The stone walls held. The floor was dry. A rusted lantern hung from a peg, and beside it sat a tin match safe wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands shook when she opened it. 3 matches remained. The first broke. The second flared. She lit the lantern and watched the hidden room wake. On the left wall were cedar shelves. On them sat 12 stoneware jars sealed with wax, each labeled in brown ink, bean seed, corn seed, apple graft, tobacco note, war sugar, winter money. Beneath the shelves lay a long chest made of chestnut, banded in iron. The lid rubbed smooth by hands that had known what they were doing. On a workbench rested a leather ledger swollen with age, a bundle of carpenter's tools wrapped in canvas, and a packet of letters tied with blue ribbon that had faded almost white. In the chest, Clara found 27 gold coins wrapped in linen. 6 silver dollars blackened at the edges. A small pouch of cut gemstones no larger than seeds, and a roll of paper money so old she was afraid to touch it. There was no glittering mountain of treasure. There was something better. There was order. There was care. There was a secret built not for show, but for surviving. Under the money lay a folded document sealed with dark wax. The front read, in a hand she did not know but felt she had been waiting to meet, "To whoever of my blood finds this when the barn has nearly fallen." Clara sat on the stone floor with the lantern beside her and opened the letter. "My name is Silas Whitlow, son of Thomas Whitlow of Naked Creek, builder of this barn, keeper of this ground, husband to Eliza May, and father to children who may one day forget why a place is held. If you have found this box, then either hunger, debt, pride, or time has brought you low enough to look under your own feet. I am sorry for the lowness. I am not sorry for the looking. I built this room in 1912 after I saw 3 families lose everything because the paper men in town knew their business better than they did. I put here what I could spare in years when crops were kind. A coin from a horse sold well, $1 from timber, seed from the best row, notes of who helped us and who we helped, because a family without a record becomes easy prey for the loudest mouth. Do not spend this all at once unless death stands at the door. Use it to buy time. Time is the first tool. With time, mend the roof. With time, plant what feeds you. With time, learn who comes with empty hands and who comes with a hammer. If the house is gone, remember that a house is walls, but a keeping place is work repeated until it becomes shelter. If the others took what shined, let them have the shining. You have found what was kept dark so it would last. There are 3 rules written in the boards above you. Look for the sound piece first. Do not put your weight where the place has not earned it. Write down what is true, especially when kin would rather you did not. If you are a daughter, know that I wrote this with my Eliza sitting across from me, and she said plain that daughters see what sons step over. I believe her. The barn belongs to the one who finds the room and understands why it was hidden. Stand up when you can. Mend what can be mended. Keep a little back for the next one. Silas Whitlow, barn builder and farmer, Piney Mountain Road, October 3, 1931. Clara read it once, and then again, and then a third time with both hands flat on the paper. She did not cry. She took the pencil stub from the ledger, found the next blank line after an entry dated November 1944, and wrote down what was true. April 8. Found the undercroft. Found the letter. Roof open. Floor failing. $16 spent. Still here. The county appraiser in Luray was named Mr. Bell, and he had a careful mouth that did not enjoy surprises. He came 2 days later because Mrs. Rucker had called him, and because the word gold has legs in a county office no matter how softly it is spoken. He wore gloves. He photographed the coins, checked dates, measured the gemstones, and unfolded the old bills under a glass weight. By the time he finished, the barn light had gone amber. Conservative value, he said, writing slowly, $46,780, not counting the historical value of the ledger or the tools. The 1854 half-eagle alone is worth more than your brothers thought that whole parcel was worth. Clara looked at the chestnut beams overhead. She heard rain beginning again on what remained of the roof. I do not want to sell the ledger, she said. Mr. Bell looked up. For the first time that day, he smiled a little. Then, do not. She did not become rich in the way newspapers like to say a person becomes rich. She paid the estate balance Russell had insisted still belonged to her. She rented a room over a seamstress shop on Main Street for 6 months. She hired 2 men from Stanley to help brace the east wall. Because pride is not the same as foolishness. She bought salvage tin, locust posts, nails, lime, a used wheelbarrow, 3 tarps, and 1 good padlock. Then she went back to the barn every morning. She worked slowly. First the roof, because water is patient and must be answered first. Then the sill. Then the floor. She kept the rotted boards that could be saved and replaced only what had truly failed. She cleaned the undercroft and left Silas's jars where they were, except for the seeds, which she took to the extension office and learned which might still carry life. In May, Mrs. Rucker came with a box of canning jars and a photograph of Abel Whitlow at 17, standing shirtless on the barn ramp with a hammer in his hand. "He made me promise not to mention the key unless the parcel came to you," she said. "He said the right child would know where not to step." In June, Amos Breeden from the next hollow brought chestnut boards he had saved from his uncle's spring house. He did not ask for payment. He only ran his hand along the barn post and said, "Your daddy helped me roof my place in 1983. I still owe him a morning." Clara wrote both names in the ledger. Money gets spent. Memory gets proud. Paper does not care who wins the argument. By August the barn stood straighter, not new. New would have been an insult. It stood like an old woman after a long illness, thinner than before, marked by what had happened, but upright and unwilling to be pitied. Clara planted beans from one of Silas's jars along the south wall. Only 7 sprouted. She fenced them with wire and checked them every evening as if they were small lamps. Russell came once, parking his clean truck where the lane was still soft. Dean came with him, because courage is easier in pairs. They had heard about the appraisal. They had heard about the gold. They had heard, Clara suspected, only the parts that sounded like money and none of the parts that sounded like warning. Russell said the discovery was part of the estate. Dean said lawyers could sort it out. Clara brought the ledger from the undercroft, opened it to Silas's letter, then to the page where Abel had written county tax paid, Piney Barn, every year in his small square hand. Then she opened to the newest line, where she had written the date, the appraisal number, and the transfer receipt showing the parcel had been abandoned to her for $16. She did not raise her voice. "Write down what is true," she said. They left before sunset. That autumn, Clara opened the barn for one Saturday gathering, not as a shop and not as a museum, but as a keeping place. People came with folding chairs, pound cakes, old photographs, and tools they wanted identified. Children ran up and down the lane. Mrs. Rucker sat near the door with her hands folded over the handle of her cane. Amos showed 2 boys how a mortise and tenon joint held without a nail. Mr. Bell brought a small display case for the coins Clara had chosen not to sell yet. When the light reached through the slats and touched the undercroft door, Clara opened the ledger and read Silas's letter aloud. No one clapped when she finished. That would have been too small a sound for what had settled over them. They simply sat in the barn her brothers had not wanted, listening to the wind move through repaired boards, and the quiet was full. By the next spring, the 7 bean plants had become a paper sack of seed. Clara labeled it Whitlow Pole Bean, Piney Mountain Strain, found 2026, saved from Silas' jar. She gave packets to anyone who promised to write down where they planted them. Not everyone did. That was all right. The keeping had begun again. She used part of the treasure to finish the roof. She used part to take classes in historic preservation at the community college in Middletown. She used part to pay a surveyor, an insurance bill, and the taxes a year ahead. She kept some back in a bank her brothers did not use. The gold coins remained in a deposit box, except one, the smallest, which she carried sometimes in her coat pocket beside her father's knife, not for luck, but for weight. On the first anniversary of Abel's death, Clara slept in the barn on a cot by the south wall while rain crossed the valley. The roof held. The beans in their jars kept dry. The ledger lay on the workbench. Near midnight, she woke and heard water running in the ditch, wind in the sycamore, and the deep wooden creak of a building settling not downward, but back into itself. She thought then of her father paying tax on a place he never explained. She thought of Silas hiding coins in darkness, not because he mistrusted the future, but because he respected how hard the future might be. She thought of Eliza telling him daughters see what sons step over. She thought of her brothers carrying away the bright things and leaving behind the thing that had learned to wait. Still here, she had written. And it was. That is the thing about the old keeping places our grandmothers and fathers leave us. They do not always look like inheritance. Sometimes they look like burden, like liability, like rot, like one more thing to sign away, because no one has time to listen to what the boards are saying. But the sound piece is often hidden under the ugliest plank. The safe place is often the one that asks you to slow down before you trust it. And the truth, once written, can stand longer than anger, longer than greed, longer than the voices that call a thing worthless because they do not know how to read it. Clara Whitlow was 24 when her brothers took the house, the car, and every dollar they could name. She had no key to the life she had known, no room waiting, no promise from anyone that justice would arrive with a clean shirt and an official stamp. She had $16, her father's folding knife, and a barn already falling down on Piney Mountain Road. She spent the $16 on the parcel no one wanted. She opened the door, found the place that had waited, and learned that her father had trusted her without ever saying the words. It was the best $16 she ever spent. If this story found a quiet place in you, subscribe and tell us where you are watching from tonight. And until the next one, keep looking for the sound piece first. See you in the last warm light of the day.